I'm Haley Thompson, and I'm 34 years old. 15 years after my father called me a burden and kicked me out, I discovered that the house he sold and $2 million my mother secretly left behind were legally mine. The day I found out, I collapsed into tears, remembering Mom's last whispered words, "Everything will make sense someday." For 15 years, I believed my father's lies while he tried to steal my inheritance. The truth would have remained buried if not for one persistent lawyer and my mother's extraordinary foresight. Before I dive into how I discovered my mother's secret fortune, let me know where you're watching from. Drop a comment, subscribe if you're new here, and get ready for a story about family secrets that will change how you think about trust. Growing up in Seattle, my early childhood memories are washed in the warm glow of safety and love, mostly thanks to my mother, Jessica. She was a dedicated nurse at Northwest Hospital, working long shifts, but somehow always finding time to be present for me. I remember her gentle hands braiding my hair before school, the smell of her vanilla perfume lingering in the hallway long after she'd left for her night shifts. She'd leave little notes in my lunchbox with silly jokes or words of encouragement. When I'd have nightmares, she'd sit at the edge of my bed, stroking my hair until I fell back asleep, no matter how early her shift started the next morning. My father, Curtis Thompson, was a different story. In my earliest memories, he was attentive and even playful. I have faded mental snapshots of him tossing me into the air at the neighborhood park, both of us laughing as my mother watched nervously from a nearby bench. He worked as an investment advisor at a local firm, wearing crisp suits and carrying a leather briefcase that I wasn't allowed to touch. He'd come home and scoop me up, calling me his little princess and bringing me small trinkets from his business trips. Our home was modest by Seattle standards, a 3-bedroom craftsman with a small backyard where Mom grew tomatoes and strawberries. It wasn't fancy, but it was immaculately kept, with bookshelves lining the living room walls and family photos clustered on every available surface. That house represented security to me, the solid foundation of our family. The contrast between my parents became more apparent as I grew older. Mom was naturally nurturing, finding joy in the simplest things. She'd make ordinary Saturdays special with pancakes shaped like animals or impromptu picnics in the living room when it rained. Dad, meanwhile, became increasingly focused on appearances and status. He'd comment on neighbors' new cars or vacations, speaking with barely disguised envy about clients who had made it big. By the time I was 10, the first clear signs of my father's dismissive attitude toward me emerged. I brought home an art project that had won recognition at school, a watercolor painting my art teacher had specifically praised. While my mother immediately wanted to frame it, my father glanced at it and said, "That's nice, but maybe focus more on math. Artists don't exactly drive BMWs." Mom stepped in immediately. "Curtis, Haley is talented. We should encourage that." Their eyes locked in a silent battle I didn't fully understand then, but my mother won that round. The painting was framed and hung in our hallway by the next day. As I entered my teen years, my passion for photography developed. I'd save my allowance to buy film for an old camera my mother found at a garage sale. My father saw this as another impractical hobby. "You're wasting money on that?" "Film costs add up, Haley," he'd say, despite the fact that I was using my own savings. My mother would quietly slip me extra film when he wasn't looking. The tension between my parents grew, though they tried to shield me from it. Sometimes I'd hear them arguing behind their bedroom door late at night, their voices hushed but intense. Often, these arguments seemed to be about money, which confused me. We lived comfortably, not luxuriously, but we never seemed to struggle. My father drove a nice car, and we took modest vacations most years. Yet the word money was often hissed through those closed doors. "You're being ridiculous about this, Jessica," I once heard my father say. "What's the point of having it if we don't use it?" "It's not about that, Curtis," my mother replied, her voice tight with restraint. "It's about security for Haley's future." I didn't understand then what they were talking about. Money was a strange, abstract concept in our house. We never seemed to lack it, yet my father constantly acted as though we needed to be careful with spending, particularly when it came to anything for me beyond necessities. On my 16th birthday, my mother gave me my first real camera, a used but high-quality Nikon that I had been eyeing for months at the local camera shop. The moment I unwrapped it, I could feel my father's disapproval radiating across the kitchen table. "That's an expensive gift for a hobby, Jessica," he said, not even addressing me directly. My mother put her hand on my shoulder. "It's not just a hobby if it's her passion, Curtis. Besides, I saved up for it specially." That camera became my most prized possession. I took it everywhere, documenting life through my viewfinder, developing my eye and my technique. Photography gave me an identity separate from the increasingly tense atmosphere at home. Through the lens, I controlled what was in frame and what wasn't, something I couldn't do in the rest of my life. By the time I was accepted to the University of Washington at 19, the distance between my father and me had grown into a chasm. He attended my high school graduation with a perfunctory smile, and his congratulations felt hollow when I received my acceptance letter. My mother, meanwhile, cried happy tears and took me shopping for dorm supplies, helping me pack with meticulous care. "I'm so proud of you, Haley," she told me as we folded clothes into suitcases. "You're going to do amazing things." I left for my freshman year feeling like I was leaving my mother alone on an island with my father, but also excited for my first taste of independence. Little did I know that my sophomore year would never be completed, and that life as I understood it was about to change forever. The call came on an ordinary Tuesday during my sophomore year. I was walking across campus, planning my photography project for midterms when my phone rang. My father's name on the screen was unusual enough to make me stop walking immediately. "Your mother collapsed at work," he said without preamble. "They've taken her to Northwest. You should come." The 3-hour gap between that call and arriving at the hospital remains a blur in my memory. I remember throwing clothes into a bag, the bus ride that felt eternal, and the antiseptic smell that hit me when I finally pushed through the hospital doors. My mother, who had spent decades caring for patients in these very halls, now lay pale against white sheets. The diagnosis came like a physical blow: advanced pancreatic cancer. Terminal. The doctor spoke gently about months, not years, while my father stood silently by the window, looking out at the Seattle skyline rather than at my crumbling mother. "This is impossible," I said, my voice barely audible. She wasn't even sick. But she had been, I learned. She'd been ignoring symptoms, attributing fatigue to long shifts, dismissing pain as normal aging. By the time she couldn't ignore it anymore, the cancer had already spread. What struck me immediately was my father's strange detachment. While I collapsed into tears by my mother's bedside, he maintained a composed, almost businesslike demeanor, discussing treatment options with doctors as if they were talking about investment strategies. There was concern there, yes, but something was missing. The devastation that should accompany the news that your partner of 25 years was dying. I made the decision that night to take a leave of absence from school. My mother protested weakly from her hospital bed. "Your education comes first, Haley. I won't let this derail your future." "Mom, there will be time for school later," I insisted, holding her increasingly frail hand. "Right now, I need to be here." The next few months became a new routine of hospital visits, home care, and hushed conversations about comfort rather than cure. My father maintained his work schedule, citing the need for health insurance and income, leaving the bulk of my mother's care to me. In truth, I was grateful for the time alone with her, even under these circumstances. During those months, we had conversations we'd never had before. She told me stories of her own youth, her dreams of becoming a photographer that she'd set aside for nursing, which felt more practical. She shared wisdom about love, friendship, and finding purpose. But there were also moments when she seemed on the verge of telling me something important, only to retreat into vague reassurances. "There are things I've arranged, Haley," she said one afternoon as we sat in the garden during a rare good day. "Things that will make sense when the time is right." When I pressed her, she smiled tiredly. "Just know that I've always tried to protect you, even from things you didn't know needed protecting from." During this period, a lawyer named Amelia Garrison visited our home 3 times. Each time, my father was at work, and I was asked to give them privacy. I thought little of it then, assuming it was standard end-of-life legal matters. Only years later would I understand the significance of those meetings. As spring turned to summer, my mother's condition deteriorated rapidly. One evening, as I adjusted her pillows, she gripped my wrist with surprising strength. "Promise me you'll go back to school after everything," she insisted. "Your photography, your education, don't give those up. Promise me." "I promise, Mom," I said, fighting back tears. "Everything will make sense someday," she whispered, a phrase she'd repeat several more times in her final days. The end came on a quiet Sunday morning in July. I was holding her hand, my father dozing in the chair by the window. She simply stopped breathing, slipping away so peacefully that for a moment, I didn't realize what had happened. The silence in the room became absolute as the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor flattened into a single tone. My father handled the funeral arrangements with the same detached efficiency he'd shown throughout her illness. When I suggested a celebration of life with her many friends and colleagues from the hospital, he insisted on keeping it simple and private. "Your mother wouldn't want a fuss," he said firmly. The funeral was indeed sparse, with just a handful of attendees. I felt hollow inside as I watched my mother's casket lowered into the ground, wondering why my father seemed more inconvenienced than bereaved. 2 weeks after the funeral, true to my promise, I returned to college. I moved through my days in a fog of grief, going through the motions of classes and assignments without really engaging. Photography, once my passion, became mechanical. I took pictures because I had promised my mother I would continue, not because I felt the joy in it anymore. I didn't know then that my mother had set wheels in motion that wouldn't complete their turn for 15 years. I didn't know that her cryptic words about things making sense someday weren't just the comfort of a dying woman, but a promise that would eventually be fulfilled. 3 years later, I graduated with my degree in visual arts, specializing in photography. The day was bittersweet, pride in my accomplishment mixed with the aching absence of my mother. My father attended the ceremony, but left immediately after, citing a work commitment. I celebrated with friends that evening, then took the bus home the next day, looking forward to a brief stay before moving to Portland where I'd lined up an interview at a photography studio. When I arrived at our family home, I was met with a scene that stopped me in my tracks. The living room was filled with cardboard boxes, some sealed with packing tape, others still open. I recognized my mother's handwriting on some of the labels: kitchen, books, Jessica's clothes. "Dad," I called out, setting down my bags. "What's going on?" My father emerged from the hallway, looking annoyed at the interruption. "Oh, you're back. I'm clearing things out." "Clearing things out?" I repeated, moving toward a box containing photo albums. "These are Mom's things. And she's been gone for 3 years," he said matter-of-factly. "It's time to move on. I'm thinking of downsizing." The casual dismissal of my mother's memory hit me like a physical blow. "You could have waited until I was here. Some of these things might be important to me." His expression hardened. "Look, Haley, I've supported you through college, which wasn't cheap. Your mother always insisted on sending you to that expensive program rather than something practical. Do you have any idea what a financial burden you've been?" The word burden echoed in the room. Financial burden. As if my education, my existence, had been nothing but a drain on him. "What are you talking about?" I asked, genuinely confused. "Mom wanted me to go to college. She made me promise. Your mother had impractical ideas about a lot of things," he cut in. "The reality is, we stretched ourselves thin for years because of her insistence on your art school." This revelation didn't align with anything I understood about our family finances. We'd never lived extravagantly, but I'd never been aware of financial struggles either. "I need you to clear out your things by the end of the week," he continued. "I'm putting the house on the market." "You're selling our home?" I couldn't process what I was hearing. "Where am I supposed to go?" "You're 22, Haley. Most adults your age are living independently. You have a degree now, supposedly. It's time you stood on your own 2 feet." The conversation devolved further, with my father revealing layers of resentment I never knew existed. He claimed they'd drained savings and taken second mortgages to cover my education and my mother's medical bills. He spoke as if my mother's illness had been an inconvenience rather than a tragedy. "Your mother's medical bills nearly bankrupted us," he said. "The insurance didn't cover everything, and then there were the experimental treatments she insisted on trying." I stood there, tears streaming down my face, as he dismantled not only my immediate future, but my understanding of the past. "Get your things and be out by Sunday," he finished coldly. "I've carried this burden long enough." The next few days passed in a traumatic blur. I packed what I could into my car. Clothes, my camera equipment, and whatever mementos of my mother I could salvage. When I asked for her jewelry box, containing pieces I remembered her wearing throughout my childhood, my father claimed he'd already sold most of it to cover debts. "The sentimental value doesn't pay bills, Haley," he said dismissively. I left that Sunday without saying goodbye, driving to Portland with tears blurring my vision and a hollowness in my chest that felt permanent. Within a week, I'd found a tiny studio apartment that consumed most of my savings for the security deposit. The photography assistant job I'd lined up paid barely above minimum wage, but it was a start. Over the following months, I learned that the family home had indeed been sold. My father had moved to a luxury condo in downtown Seattle. When I called to ask for my mother's remaining personal items, photos, letters, anything he might have kept, he brushed me off. "I got rid of most of that stuff," he said. "Too many painful memories." It was the last conversation we had for years. I blocked his number and focused on building my life from scratch. The student loans that I'd taken out weighed heavily on me, especially given my entry-level salary. There were months when I had to choose between paying the full loan payment and buying groceries. Gradually, I built a career in commercial photography. From assistant, I became an associate photographer, then started freelancing for local businesses and eventually magazines. I developed a distinctive style that emphasized authenticity and natural light. By my late 20s, I was making a decent living, though nowhere near wealthy. Throughout this time, I avoided anything to do with my father. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned he had remarried quickly less than 2 years after my mother's death. To a woman named Diane who came from money. They traveled extensively, posting photos from exotic locations on social media accounts I eventually stopped checking. The word burden followed me through these years, an unwelcome shadow that colored my perceptions of myself and my relationships. I kept people at a distance, afraid to become too dependent or attached. I lived modestly, always saving for an emergency, perpetually afraid of becoming financially vulnerable. I never spoke about my family situation to friends or colleagues. As far as most people knew, both my parents had died, a simplification that was easier than explaining the complicated truth. On the surface, I was a successful, independent woman building a career I loved. Inside, I carried wounds that had never properly healed and questions that had never been answered. 15 years after my mother's death, my life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. At 34, I owned a small but thriving photography business in Portland, specializing in commercial work for local businesses and the occasional magazine spread. My apartment was modest, but filled with art and plants, a sanctuary I had created for myself. While I dated occasionally, I had never quite managed to build a relationship that lasted, always holding back a part of myself, afraid to become too vulnerable. The call came on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon. I was editing photos from a restaurant shoot when my phone rang with an unknown Seattle number. I nearly declined it, assuming it was a telemarketer, but something made me answer. "Is this Haley Thompson?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, who's calling?" I replied cautiously. "My name is Sarah Taylor from Taylor & Associates law firm in Seattle. I've been trying to locate you for some time. It's regarding your mother, Jessica Thompson." My heart skipped. 15 years after her death, my mother's name coming from a stranger's lips was jarring. "This is some kind of scam," I said immediately, my finger hovering over the end call button. "It's not a scam, Miss Thompson," the woman said quickly. "Your mother was a client of our firm. We've been attempting to execute certain aspects of her estate plan for many years, but haven't been able to locate you. If you could come to our office in Seattle, I can explain everything." My father handled my mother's estate when she died, I said, the words tasting bitter. There's nothing left to discuss. That's not entirely accurate, Sarah Taylor replied. There were provisions your father was not privy to. Please, this is important. I knew your mother personally. Something in her voice, a genuine earnestness, made me pause. After arranging a meeting for the following week, I hung up and sat staring at my computer screen, unable to focus on work anymore. Could this possibly be legitimate? Or was it an elaborate con, preying on my lingering grief? The following Monday, I found myself in a wood-paneled office in downtown Seattle, facing an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes. Sarah Taylor appeared to be in her 70s, with the sharp gaze of someone who had spent decades parsing legal complexities. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Thompson," she said, gesturing to a chair. "I've been trying to find you for a very long time." "Why couldn't you find me?" I asked. "I'm not exactly hiding. You changed your name professionally, moved multiple times, and had no social media presence until relatively recently," she explained. "And your father was less than helpful when we attempted to contact him about you." My suspicion must have shown on my face, because she opened a drawer and pulled out a thick file. "Your mother came to me 17 years ago, separately from your father," she began. "She wanted to create a trust and, well, that would protect certain assets. She was very specific about the terms and timing." Sarah Taylor explained that my mother had come from family money, something I'd never known. Her parents had left her a substantial inheritance, which she had kept separate from the family finances, investing it quietly over the years. "Your mother specified that the existence of these assets was to be kept confidential until either 15 years had passed since her death or until your father had remarried, whichever came first." "He remarried years ago," I said, confused. "To a woman named Diane." Sarah nodded. "We learned that 3 years after your mother's passing. We attempted to locate you then, but you had moved from your last known address, changed your professional name to Haley Thomas for your photography business, and left no forwarding information. Your father claimed he had no contact with you and didn't know where you were." The revelation that my mother had secret assets was stunning enough, but learning she had deliberately kept them from my father and created this elaborate plan left me reeling. "Why would she do this?" I asked. "Why all the secrecy?" Sarah's expression softened. "Your mother left a letter that should explain everything. But before we get to that, I need to tell you what exactly she left behind." As the elderly lawyer continued speaking, I felt the floor shifting beneath me. My mother, the practical nurse who clipped coupons and bought my clothes on sale, had secretly been worth millions. And she had left it all to me, with the specific instruction that my father never control it. "There's more," Sarah said, pulling out another folder. "The family home that your father sold after your mother's death? He didn't actually have the right to sell it." "What do you mean?" I asked, genuinely confused. "Your mother paid off the mortgage in full 2 years before her death, using her separate funds. She then transferred ownership to a trust in your name, with the provision that your father could live there until he remarried or attempted to sell it. When he listed it for sale, our firm intervened legally. But the house was sold," I insisted. "I drove by it once, years ago. A different family was living there. What your father thought was a sale was actually a blocked transaction. The trust has been renting the property to tenants, with the income reinvested. The house is yours, Haley. It has been all along." I sat back in my chair, trying to process this information. For 15 years, I had believed my father's story about debt and burden. For 15 years, I had struggled with student loans and tight budgets, never knowing that my mother had provided for me in ways I couldn't have imagined. "There's a letter," Sarah said gently, sliding an envelope across the desk. "Your mother wrote it during her illness. She asked that you read it when the time came." With trembling fingers, I took the envelope, recognizing my mother's handwriting instantly. The past and present collided as I held this message from beyond time, from a mother to a daughter, bridging 15 years of silence. The envelope felt impossibly heavy in my hands. I stared at my name written in my mother's familiar handwriting, a ghost from the past reaching forward through time to find me. Sarah Taylor discreetly excused herself, giving me privacy for this moment. I broke the seal carefully and unfolded several pages of stationery I recognized from our old home. The letter was dated just weeks before her death. My dearest Haley, asterisk if you're reading this, then Sarah has finally found you, and enough time has passed for me to tell you the truth. There is so much I wanted to say to you in person, but protecting you meant keeping certain things secret, even from you. Asterisk first, you should know that I come from a wealthy family. My parents died when you were very young, leaving me a substantial inheritance. I chose not to change our lifestyle, or tell your father the full extent of what I received. Money changes people, Haley, and I had already begun to see changes in Curtis that worried me. Asterisk, I loved your father when we married, but over the years, I watched him become increasingly fixated on status and wealth. The man who once loved simple picnics in the park began to resent our modest home and lifestyle. He wanted more, always more, regardless of what it cost emotionally. Asterisk 3 years before my diagnosis, I discovered Curtis was having an affair with Diane Winters, a wealthy divorcee he met through his investment firm. I confronted him, and he promised to end it, claiming it was just a mistake. I wanted to believe him, for your sake. But I also began to protect myself and you financially. Asterisk, I paid off our home mortgage without telling him, transferring the deed to a trust in your name. I created a separate investment account for your college education and future security. When I became ill and realized I might not survive, I accelerated these plans, working with Sarah to ensure that you would be provided for no matter what happened. Asterisk, I suspected that once I was gone, Curtis would try to access these funds and possibly push you out of his life. He had been planning his exit for years, waiting until you were in college. My illness accelerated his timeline, but complicated his plans. Asterisk, I'm so sorry for the pain you must have endured. I hoped that Curtis would rise to the occasion after my death, that fatherly love would prevail. If you're reading this, I fear that didn't happen. Asterisk, the house is yours. The money in the trust is yours. Approximately $2 million, which should have grown over time with investments. Use it for your photography, for your dreams, for the life you deserve. Asterisk, I know money can't make up for what you've lost, but it can perhaps give you the freedom to heal and build something beautiful. That's all I've ever wanted for you. Asterisk, remember that your worth has never been determined by your father's perception. You were never a burden, Haley. You were, and always will be, my greatest joy. Asterisk, with eternal love. Asterisk, Mom. Asterisk, I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Each reading revealed new layers of my mother's love, foresight, and pain. She had known all along what my father was capable of. She had been protecting me even as she was dying, setting up safeguards that would activate years after she was gone. When Sarah returned to the office, she found me clutching the letter to my chest. She knew, I said simply. She knew what he would do. Sarah nodded. Your mother was a remarkable woman. Very intelligent, very thorough. She made me promise I would find you, no matter how long it took. Over the next hour, Sarah walked me through the details of my inheritance. The house in Seattle, now worth considerably more than when my mother had paid it off. The trust fund, which had indeed grown to just over $2 million through careful investment. There were also personal items my mother had stored in a safe deposit box, jewelry, photographs, and keepsakes she hadn't wanted my father to dispose of. What about my father's claim that they were in debt from medical bills? I asked. Sarah's expression hardened slightly. Your mother's medical care was fully covered by her insurance and her own separate funds. There were no debts, Haley. That was a fabrication. The reality of my father's deception was staggering. He had lied about debt to justify pushing me out. He had attempted to sell a house that wasn't his to sell. He had called me a burden while trying to access money that was never meant for him. There's one more thing you should know, Sarah said, her voice gentle but firm. Your father has attempted multiple times over the years to contest your mother's separate will and gain access to these assets. Our firm has successfully blocked every attempt. He knew. I whispered, horrified. All this time, he knew there was money? He knew your mother had some family money, yes? But he didn't know the extent of it or that she had placed it all in trust for you with such specific conditions. When he learned he couldn't touch it after her death, he was quite upset. The full picture was finally coming into focus. My father's coldness after my mother's death, his rush to remove her possessions, his insistence that I leave immediately after graduation. It had all been part of his plan to move on to his new life with Diane, unencumbered by his past and furious that he couldn't access my mother's money. What happens now? I asked, feeling simultaneously empty and full. Now, Sarah said with the first smile I'd seen from her, you claim what's rightfully yours. The house, the funds, the future your mother wanted for you. As I left the law office that afternoon, I stepped onto the Seattle street feeling like a different person than when I'd arrived. The burden I'd carried for 15 years, that I was unwanted, a financial drain, somehow unworthy, began to lift, replaced by the weight of a truth that was painful but also freeing. My mother had never stopped fighting for me, even from beyond the grave. And now, I would have to decide what to do with her final gift. For several days after meeting with Sarah Taylor, I wandered through my life in a daze. I took the week off work, claiming a family emergency, which wasn't entirely untrue. I extended my stay in Seattle, moving from my hotel to a short-term rental while I processed everything I'd learned. The question that kept circling in my mind was, should I confront my father? Part of me wanted to leave him in ignorance, to simply claim what was mine and disappear again. But another part, a stronger part, needed closure. I needed him to know that his deception had failed, that my mother had outsmarted him, and that I knew the truth. With Sarah Taylor's help, I began researching my father's current life. Through public records and social media, we discovered that he and Diane were living in an exclusive lakeside community outside Seattle. He had retired from his investment firm 5 years earlier and now spent his time golfing, traveling, and serving on the boards of several local charitable organizations, cultivating the image of a generous, community-minded retiree. We need to proceed carefully, Sarah advised during one of our meetings. Your father has proven himself to be manipulative and dishonest. If you want to confront him, we should do it on legally solid ground. We decided on a formal approach. Sarah would send official notification about the trust assets, including the house, being transferred to my active management now that I had been located. This would serve as the opening move, letting my father know that his past actions were now exposed. The response was almost immediate. Within hours of the legal notification being delivered, my phone, which Sarah had included in the documents, began ringing with an unfamiliar number. I let it go to voicemail. Haley, this is your father. His voice sounded older, but carried the same authoritative tone I remembered. I've received some confusing paperwork from a law firm claiming to represent you. Call me immediately so we can straighten this out. The text followed soon after. This must be some kind of mistake. These lawyers are clearly trying to scam you. Your mother and I were always transparent about our finances. I need you to call me ASAP. Each message made me more certain that confrontation was necessary. After consulting with Sarah, we arranged a meeting at her office for the following Monday. My father was informed that if he wanted to discuss the matter, that would be the appropriate venue, with legal representation present. He agreed with surprising speed. The weekend before the meeting, I visited the family home, my home, for the first time in 15 years. Sarah arranged for the current tenants to be away for a few hours, allowing me private access. Walking through those familiar rooms was surreal. The house had been redecorated by the tenants, yet the bones of it remained the same. The kitchen where my mother had taught me to bake cookies. The backyard where she had nurtured her garden. The window seat in the living room where I'd spent countless hours reading and dreaming. I ran my hand along the banister leading upstairs, remembering how I used to slide down it despite my parents' warnings. In my old bedroom, now converted to a home office, I stood by the window where I'd once photographed birds visiting the feeder my mother had installed. This house contained the physical memory of my mother in a way nothing else did. Standing there, I felt her presence more strongly than I had in years, as if she were whispering, "Welcome home, Haley." Monday arrived with a knot of anxiety in my stomach. I dressed carefully in a tailored black pantsuit, projecting the successful professional I had become rather than the wounded daughter I still sometimes felt like. Sarah met me in the reception area of her firm, giving my arm a reassuring squeeze. "Remember, you have nothing to be ashamed of or defensive about," she said. "This is about truth and justice, not revenge." At precisely 10 o'clock, the receptionist announced the arrival of Curtis Thompson and his attorney. When my father walked into the conference room, I was struck by how much he had aged. His hair was completely silver now, his face lined, but he still carried himself with the same self-importance I remembered. He was dressed expensively, a gold watch glinting at his wrist. His eyes widened slightly when he saw me, perhaps surprised by the confident woman who had replaced the devastated girl he had cast aside 15 years earlier. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across his face before he composed himself. "Haley," he said, his tone somewhere between surprised and cautious. "You look well." "Thank you for coming, Mr. Thompson," Sarah interjected before I could respond. "Please have a seat." My father and his lawyer, a sleek man in his 50s with an expensive suit and a permanent frown, took their places across the table. Sarah began by outlining the facts. My mother's separate trust, the house ownership, the investments, and the specific conditions that had kept these assets protected from my father's interference. As Sarah spoke, I watched my father's expression shift from feigned confusion to poorly concealed anger. His attorney whispered something to him when Sarah mentioned the multiple attempts to contest the will over the years. "This is absurd," my father finally interrupted. "Jessica and I shared everything. We had joint accounts, joint ownership. These documents must be forgeries." Sarah calmly placed a stack of papers on the table. "These are the original documents, Mr. Thompson, with your wife's signature, properly witnessed and notarized. We also have records of the fund's origins, her family inheritance, which predated your marriage and was never commingled with joint assets. As an investment advisor, you should appreciate the careful paper trail." My father's attorney examined the documents while my father sat back, his jaw working as if chewing on his response. "Even if these are legitimate," he finally said, "it was clearly not Jessica's intention to cut me out completely. We were married for 25 years. She must have been influenced by her illness or medication." It was the first time I spoke during the meeting. "She was protecting me," I said, my voice steady despite the emotion churning inside. "She knew what you would do once she was gone." My father's eyes flashed to mine. "You have no idea what went on in our marriage, Haley. You were just a child." "I know you called me a burden," I replied. "I know you kicked me out immediately after graduation, claiming financial hardship from Mom's medical bills, bills that were fully covered. I know you tried to sell a house that wasn't yours to sell." His face flushed red. "You have no proof of any of that." "Actually," Sarah interjected, "we have quite a bit of documentation regarding your attempts to sell the property and access the trust funds. We also have testimonials from neighbors about Ms. Thompson being asked to leave the family home shortly after her college graduation." My father leaned forward, switching tactics. "Look, Haley, there have clearly been misunderstandings on both sides. I was grieving too, in my own way. Perhaps I wasn't as supportive as I could have been after your mother's death." The audacity of this understatement after 15 years of abandonment was breathtaking. "You told me we were in debt," I said quietly. "You made me believe I was a financial drain. I struggled for years with student loans while you were living in luxury with Diane. There was no misunderstanding. You lied to me." For a moment, something like shame crossed my father's face, quickly replaced by defensiveness. "Your mother should have been honest with me about her finances," he countered. "She knew how hard I worked, how much I sacrificed. That money should have been used to improve our lives together." "So you admit you knew she had family money?" Sarah asked quickly. My father realized his mistake too late. His lawyer put a warning hand on his arm, but he was too angry to heed it. "Of course I knew. Her parents left her a decent inheritance, but she was always so secretive about it, so controlling. She'd only use it for Haley's education or her precious house improvements. Never for the things I wanted: the vacations, the club memberships, the lifestyle we deserved." The truth was finally out in the open. My mother hadn't kept her inheritance secret. She had simply refused to spend it the way my father wanted. And after her death, he had expected to finally control it all. Mr. Thompson, his lawyer said firmly, I advise you not to continue this line of discussion. But my father was on a roll now, years of resentment spilling out. Do you have any idea what it was like, Haley? Working with clients who had everything, coming home to Jessica's insistence on living like we were middle class? She could have used that money to help me advance, to make connections. Instead, she hoarded it for you. She protected it for me, I corrected him. And she was right to do so. My father's attorney was now visibly uncomfortable. Perhaps we should take a brief recess. I want what's rightfully mine, my father interrupted. Half of Jessica's estate, at minimum. I'll contest this all the way to the Supreme Court if I have to. Sarah remained unruffled. You've already tried to contest it 3 times, Mr. Thompson. The trust is ironclad. The conditions were clearly established while your wife was of sound mind, with multiple witnesses. Additionally, you signed a prenuptial agreement with Diane Winters that effectively severed any remaining claims you might have had to Jessica's estate. At the mention of the prenuptial agreement, my father fell silent. His lawyer whispered urgently to him, and I could see his shoulders slump slightly as the reality of his situation sank in. What do you want, Haley? He finally asked, his voice quieter now. Money? Is that why you've come back after all these years? I met his gaze steadily. I didn't come back for anything. I didn't even know there was anything to come back for until Sarah found me. I built my life without your help, despite your cruelty. Then what is this about? He demanded. Truth, I said simply. Mom deserved to have her wishes honored. And I deserved to know that I was never the burden you claimed I was. The meeting concluded shortly after, with my father and his lawyer leaving first. Before he walked out, my father paused at the door. For what it's worth, Haley, I did love your mother. In my way. I didn't respond. Some wounds are too deep for simple apologies, some betrayals too fundamental for easy reconciliation. As the door closed behind him, I felt a complex mixture of emotions, vindication, lingering anger, but also, surprisingly, relief. The confrontation I had feared for so long was over, and I had emerged stronger for it. He'll try again to challenge the trust, Sarah warned after they had left. He's not the type to give up easily. Let him try, I said with newfound confidence. Mom outsmarted him. We'll keep it that way. Sarah smiled at me with something like pride. Your mother would be very pleased to see you now, Haley. Very pleased indeed. 1 month after the confrontation with my father, I stood in the empty living room of my childhood home, now truly mine in every sense. The previous tenant's lease had ended, and I had decided not to renew it immediately, giving myself time to decide what this house would mean in my future. Sunlight streamed through the bay windows, catching dust motes in its golden beams. I had hired cleaners, but the house still held the lingering scent of strangers' lives. I moved through the rooms slowly, reacquainting myself with their dimensions, noting what had changed and what remained the same. In my parents' former bedroom, my mother's room, I corrected myself mentally. I ran my hands along the built-in shelves my mother had loved. On a whim, I pressed against the back panel of the lowest shelf, remembering a trick my mother had shown me once when I was very young. To my surprise, it still moved, revealing a small hidden compartment. Inside was a metal box I had never seen before. With trembling hands, I lifted it out and carried it to the window seat. The key was taped to the bottom, just as my mother would have arranged it, practical even in secrecy. When I opened it, I found a treasure trove of memories, photographs I had never seen, letters from my grandmother to my mother, and a smaller envelope with my name on it, another letter, different from the one Sarah had given me. My sweet Haley, if you found this box, then you've remembered our special hiding place. There are things I couldn't put in my official letters, things too personal for lawyers and documents. I want you to know that the years I spent raising you were the happiest of my life. Every school play, every photograph you took, every time you crawled into my bed during a thunderstorm, these moments were my true wealth. I made mistakes in my marriage. I stayed too long with a man who had changed from the person I fell in love with. I kept secrets when perhaps honesty would have been better. But I never, ever regretted a single sacrifice I made for you. Asterisk, the house is yours now. Make it a home again, either for yourself or for someone else who needs it. The money is yours too. Use it wisely, but don't let it define you. Remember that you made your own way before you ever knew about this inheritance. That strength is yours forever. Asterisk, I love you endlessly. Asterisk, Mom. Asterisk, along with the letter were photographs I had never seen. My mother as a young woman, carefree and laughing at a beach. My parents on their wedding day, looking genuinely happy. My mother holding me as a newborn, her expression one of pure wonder. These glimpses into her life before mine, and the early days of our family before things soured, were priceless. Over the next few weeks, I divided my time between Portland, where I was wrapping up ongoing photography projects, and Seattle, where I was reimagining my childhood home. I decided not to sell it. This place held too much of my mother to let it go. Instead, I began renovations, maintaining the character my mother had loved while updating it to reflect my own aesthetic. The front bedroom, once mine, became a home office. The dining room where we had shared countless meals was refreshed, but kept largely the same. And the sunroom at the back of the house, my mother's favorite spot, I transformed into a photography studio, with perfect natural light streaming through the windows she had so carefully positioned to capture the garden views. As I settled into this new chapter, I made decisions about the inheritance as well. With Sarah Taylor's guidance, I paid off my remaining student loans and set aside funds for the house renovation. But the bulk of the money, I decided, would go toward establishing a photography scholarship in my mother's name at my alma mater, specifically for students facing financial hardship. It felt right to honor her by helping others pursue their artistic passions, just as she had supported mine. Part of the house, the finished basement with its separate entrance, I converted into a teaching studio where I could offer photography workshops to underprivileged youth. My mother had always believed in giving back to the community, and this seemed the perfect extension of her legacy. With the physical spaces taking shape, I turned my attention to the emotional reconstruction that was equally necessary. I reached out to old friends from college, reconnecting with people I had kept at arm's length during my struggling years. I joined a therapy group for adults dealing with parental estrangement, finding solace in shared experiences and healing strategies. In one particularly powerful session, the therapist asked us to write letters to our estranged parents, not to send, but to express the feelings we had carried for so long. As I wrote to my father, I realized something surprising. Beneath the anger and hurt, I felt pity for him. He had been married to a remarkable woman, but had been too blinded by materialistic desires to appreciate her. He had a daughter who would have loved him unconditionally, yet he had measured her worth only in terms of cost and benefit. Your father made his choices, my therapist said when I shared this insight. And in doing so, he lost the true treasures in his life. This perspective helped me move toward a kind of forgiveness, not for his benefit, but for my own. I would never forget what he had done, but I could choose not to let it define me any longer. 6 months after moving back to Seattle, I hosted a housewarming gathering. Old college friends, new colleagues from the photography community, and neighbors filled the rooms with laughter and conversation. As I moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and sharing stories about the renovation process, I caught sight of a photograph I had placed on the mantel. My mother in her garden, smiling directly at the camera. In that moment, I felt her presence more strongly than I had in 15 years. Later that evening, after the last guest had left, I sat in the window seat with a cup of tea, looking out at the Seattle skyline glittering in the distance. The house felt alive again, filled with new energy while still honoring its past. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Taylor. Your mother would be so proud of what you've done with everything she left you. As I typed my reply, I realized the profound truth in those words. My mother had left me far more than a house and money. She had given me an example of strength, foresight, and unconditional love. She had shown me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in how we care for the people who matter to us. She had protected me even when she knew she wouldn't be there to see the results. The greatest lesson from this 15-year journey wasn't about inheritance or justice, but about worth. For years, I had carried my father's judgment that I was a burden, a drain, something to be discarded when convenient. My mother's posthumous gift wasn't just financial security, it was the irrefutable evidence that I had always been valued, always been worthy of protection and love. As I move forward with my life, teaching photography to eager students in the studio that once was my childhood home, I often think about the nature of legacy. My father, with all his focus on wealth and status, will leave behind little of true value. My mother, who died too young, continues to touch lives through the scholarship bearing her name and through the lessons she imparted to me. The greatest inheritance wasn't the money or the house, but finally understanding my own worth. Something my mother knew all along. If you've ever been made to feel like a burden by someone who should have treasured you, I hope my story reminds you that other people's judgments don't define your value. Have you experienced something similar, or are you still healing from family wounds? Share your story in the comments below, and let's build a community of support. Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories of resilience and redemption, and give this video a thumbs up if it resonated with you. Remember, sometimes the truth takes time to emerge, but healing is always possible. Thank you for being here with me today.